7.2 Learning D, Assassination of JFK and Johnson's Great Society Notes. Please add 3 pieces of information to each slide. Okay, so John F. Kennedy was elected in 1960. On November 22nd, 1963, he was in Dallas campaigning for his 1964 re-election. He was doing pretty well. The Bay of Pigs fiasco was obviously sort of a road bump in his presidency, but he had handled the Berlin crisis, the building of the Berlin Wall, and the Cuban Missile Crisis with some deftness, and he had prevented a nuclear war. He's also fairly popular with minorities in poverty and people in poverty, along with Catholics throughout the country. So he had an enormous amount of support. So he was riding through Dallas, waving at crowds and with his wife at his side, and the governor of Texas in front of him. He was shot, he was assassinated with a high-power rifle from a book depository in the 6th floor of a nearby building. There were 3 shots. The first shot him through the back, the second missed, and the third hit him in the head. Kennedy was pronounced dead soon after, and LBJ was sworn in as president. Go ahead and pause and add 3 pieces of information. Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested hours later. There were possible connections to USSR and Cuba. In fact, Oswald had lived in the Soviet Union for 2 years. 2 days later, Oswald was being transferred from jail to jail and was killed by a guy named Jack Ruby, who was a nightclub owner who had mob ties. Now, Jack Ruby said that he was so upset that JFK had been assassinated that he, in turn, killed Oswald out of revenge. He was patriotic, he said, and he doesn't even remember killing the man. He was so enraged. He would die a few years later in jail. Supreme Court Justice Earl Warren asked to lead an investigation. There's all of these questions about the assassin being assassinated, about the ties to the Soviet Union and the ties to Cuba. So to sort of quell a lot of those conspiracy theories, there was what was called the Warren Commission. The Warren Commission investigated for 10 months at all the official documents to see if there was any sort of conspiracy. There was all sorts of things that just sort of went wrong. The autopsy was rushed and unprofessionally done. There was all sorts of problems with the actual procedure in it, and eventually people have looked to these things to show that that there definitely was something odd about this assassination. However, nothing was determined to warrant any sort of conspiracy theory, and the government officially said that Oswald acted alone. Go ahead and pause and add 3 things. This video is a little bit disturbing because this is what's called the Zapruder Film. All you need to do is watch this film. People pick apart this film and go frame by frame and everything else. That's why this is like a 6-minute video on YouTube, even though it's really just a very short video. It was a clear picture of the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Here you can see the motorcade, along the motorcycles in front, the police officers in the back. JFK is going to be in the passenger rear seat. The governor is going to be in the front. Here you can see there's a shot. Jackie Kennedy is looking over to see what's wrong. JFK was shot in the back. The governor was also shot. Second shot misses, and the third shot's going to hit him in the head. This is a little disturbing. Right here. The car speeds off. Secret Service covers him up. Lyndon B. Johnson was sworn in as president on Air Force One. So Johnson continues JFK's policies. He kept JFK's cabinet, his advisors, and basically declared JFK's wish of unconditional war on poverty. He passed laws that JFK couldn't get through Congress before he was assassinated. JFK was a champion of poor people. He was actually really upset at the sort of permanent underclass that was created. Poor people having poor babies and them growing up to be poor and not able to transfer the skills of being successful to their children, and then they be poor and continue, and so on and so forth. In fact, a lot of the post-war prosperity just did not touch this permanent underclass. So Congress went ahead and passed some items that they had not and would not pass before. The Job Corps and Visa were both ways for people to volunteer and to help train people in poverty-stricken areas and help give skills to people either in the country or throughout the world. The Civil Rights Act was passed, and JFK had shown support for this before. We talked about this during the Civil Rights objective. Go ahead and pause. You don't actually need to write anything on this slide. This is just an example of the Great Society, which was LBJ's group of laws. He used what's called the Johnson treatment to get people to in Congress to pass what he wanted, and he had a group of laws called the Great Society. The Johnson treatment was basically him bullying people. He's a really tall man, and he would physically impose himself on people. If you want to see a picture of it, go ahead and just Google the Johnson treatment, and you'll see pictures of him imposing his will as he talks to people excuse me, in Congress. He's reelected in a landslide that JFK was campaigning for when he was assassinated. He begins to push his ideas called the Great Society. The Great Society had quite a few successes, and these were massive changes. So some of the changes that he did, or some of the laws that he passed, most of these are still around today. In fact, all of these that I'm about to tell you. Medicare and Medicaid were ways for health care to be extended to the people who could not afford it. Federal money to the elderly was Medicare. You care for grandpa and grandma. Medicaid was federal money to poor for their health care because you're aiding people who can't afford it. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act. This is federal money to poor schools. This is the first time the federal government gets involved in the nation's school districts, in the nation's school system. This had typically been this was a state power, state law. Teachers are, for example, state employees. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act was first passed in 1965 and amended a bunch of times, including more recently with the No Child Left Behind with George W. Bush, and used to justify things like the race to the top from Barack Obama, where federal dollars are implemented in local school districts to achieve national goals. The National Traffic and Motor Vehicle Safety Act basically was the Meat Inspection Act for the auto industry. There was an enormous amount of safety issues that needed to be addressed by the federal government, and there became rules like, make sure the gas tank is in a safe position. There were instances of cars burning and people being unsafe in relatively minor accidents. And these are type of regulations that the auto industry is required to follow today. Wilderness Preservation Act added more federal lands that were to be unpurchased and untouched by companies. The Public Broadcasting Act created PBS and NPR. PBS is a television station that has things like that broadcasts for free throughout the country. This has programs like Sesame Street. In some ways, LBJ, even with his bullying, is partly responsible for Elmo. NPR is a national public radio. You can find that in local stations around as well, with lots of news and other programs. The Truth in Lending Act is also an incredibly important law, and for example, this requires banks to report actual interest costs to those who they're lending to. This way that banks can't hide anything. So if you get someday when you get a mortgage, the banker, after you're about to sign your finances away for quite a few years, will have to tell you over the life of the loan how much you'll have to pay them. For example, my first home that I considered purchasing was a small one for $80,000. I didn't actually buy it, thank goodness, but as I went through the process, before I signed the final deal, the banker had to tell me how much I would be paying in interest over the life of the loan. So it was a 30-year mortgage, which is pretty typical, and a pretty small, low percentage for the time, like 7%, I think. And so I was shown that over the life of the loan, over the 30 years, if I paid the minimum payment, my $80,000 home would cost me $180,000. This is the truth when I get a mortgage, and will be for you as well, to a degree, and based on the interest rate and the length of your mortgage. So these are all really important laws that are still around today, and they're all in sort of Johnson's goal to create this great society, a utopia, which is heaven on earth. Now, this would be overshadowed in Johnson's presidency by the Vietnam War, and he wasn't able to do as much as he would like. But these are certainly massive successes or massive changes in the United States, whichever you want to look at it. So the activity that you're going to do, you can go ahead and pause and add 3 notes, but the activity that you're going to do after this is compare the New Deal, FDR's programs, either the first or the second New Deal, to the Great Society. Now, ways that I've suggested that you do this is on the back of this sheet, the note sheet that you've been given. Compare the New Deal to the Great Society in here's a few options. You can compare the economic situations that each set of laws was based upon, the specific laws, which a lot of people do, like compare, for example, the Social Security Act to Medicare. That's an easy one to do. Maybe the strategies that each president used to pass these particular laws, and maybe even sort of the previous presidents, the immediate previous president that allowed